If you haven't created a flared skirt pattern yet, you'll need to create one or have a commercial pattern that you can use as your foundation. Because this week I'm showing you how to create culottes using a flared skirt pattern. I'm Alexandra Morgan from In-House Patterns and In-House Pattern Studio. I teach experienced sewers and budding pattern makers how to make and adjust patterns for fit and style. You'll find loads of fitting and pattern making tutorials at inhousepatternstudio.com and some lovely sewing patterns at inhousepatterns.com. Now, before we get started on the pattern, you'll need your crotch depth measurement. Now, to find your personal measurement, simply tie an elastic around your waist and sit on a firm, flat seat. Take the measurement from the waist elastic to the seat of the chair at the side of the body. You're going to record the measurement that comes up, and then you are ready to draft. Let me show you how. Okay, so once you have your crotch depth measurement, you're going to need two measurements from the block that you created for your skirt. So this measurement comes from your skirt block, and you're going to need the back hip width and the front hip width from your skirt block. So all you need to do is measure each of those measurements separately to get those measurements. My back hip on my skirt block is 11 inches and the front hip measures 10.5 inches. So I'm going to be using those measurements in my draft. Now, as I mentioned previously, you are going to need a flared skirt pattern in order to follow through with this project. So what I want you to do is, if you haven't done so already, is you're going to follow through with the tutorial I have on how to create a balanced flared skirt. And I can leave a link for you on this page somewhere so that you have that information. So I have already done that. I've created a flared skirt block using that tutorial that I shared with you. And I've created a new front and back skirt pattern that I'm going to use in order to develop the culotte pattern that I'm going to be creating. So all I've done here is I have traced out my back pattern piece, because we are going to start with the back in this tutorial first. And I've just traced out my flared skirt block and I've applied it to a clean sheet of paper. Now you are going to see some shadow markings here, but I'm going to walk you through the draft entirely. So once again, we are starting with the back. And you do have your measurements from your block, the back hip width and the front hip width. So I'm just going to shift this over a little bit so you can see what's going to happen. So basically, culottes are shorts that look like a skirt, or pants that look like a skirt. So that's why we're starting with this flared block pattern here. So the first thing I want you to do is find measurement point A on your draft here. Measurement point A is going to be at this center back waistline point. So find that point right there, and you're going to just make a marking there. Now, to find B on your draft, you're going to measure from A to B is going to be your crotch depth, which you actually measured from your measurement there. I told you how to do that. And you're going to plot that onto the center back line, and you're going to add 3/4 of an inch for ease. So my crotch depth on my personal body is 11 3/4 of an inch, and I added 3/4 of an inch to that measurement to get 12.5. You can definitely do this draft in metric as well. You're just going to take your measurements in metric, and instead of 3/4, you're going to add 2 centimeters. And then you're going to find that position on the center back line, and then I simply want you to label that B. Now C is going to be plotted next. So what you're going to do is draw a perpendicular line from the center back line of your skirt, and you're just going to extend it out, and just arbitrarily at this moment you just want to make sure it's a 90-degree angle. And what the measurement is going to be along that line is half of the basic back hip width and you're going to add 3/4 of an inch or 2 centimeters. So half of my back hip measurement on my block is 5.5 inches, and then I'm going to add 3/4 of an inch to that measurement. So my measurement from B to C is going to be 6.25 inches. So I'm just going to plot that, and I'm going to label that C. So again, half of the basic back hip width, adding 3/4 of an inch or 2 centimeters if you are working in metric. Now you're also going to just simply extend out the center back the same amount from center back out perpendicular to the center back line. You can label this center back hem area D, and then you can label this one E because it is going to be the same distance from B to C, and D to E are going to be exactly the same. And then you can simply join C and E together. So you've just created a box which is going to be an extension. This is actually your crotch extension for your back of your culottes. Now your next step is going to be to find the crotch curve of the back of your culottes. So what we're going to do here is we're going to find point X on the center back line of our draft here. A to X is half of the A to B measurement, and you're just going to subtract 1/2 inch or 1.3 centimeters. So if I find the halfway point between A and B, my measurement there is 12.5, which means my measurement is going to be 6.25, and I'm going to subtract 1/2 inch from that. My measurement from A to X is going to be 5.75 of an inch. Now we need to find the depth of the curve on the back crotch. So what we're going to do is draw a box that is extending from the center back line and the point B. And it could just be a 1-inch box. And then I'm going to draw a line that joins the 2 corners of the box that is 1.75 of an inch long. So this is simply just going to be a guideline to give us the position of where to aim for our crotch curve shape. Now, once we have those points, we can easily determine our crotch curve based on these points. We're going to join X to this little area here to C. Now, don't be so overly concerned about hitting C exactly. You're looking for a really nice, smooth crotch curve shape that basically blends into your crotch extension here. Now when I place my ruler like this on the draft, I really like how it hits X really smoothly. It hits this point of the extension from B, and it blends really nice and neatly into my extension out to C. So I'm going to use that as my back crotch curve and just draw that in. Before we move on to drafting the front culotte pattern, we're going to take some measurements from our back draft. So we are going to take the measurement from B to X so that we have that to apply to our front pattern. Now my measurement here is 6.75. So I'm just going to record that here. Now, of course, as I said, you can take these measurements in metric as well. We are also going to take the segment D to B so that we can apply that to our front culotte pattern as well. So I'm just going to measure that, and I'm going to get 9.5 for my segment there. Now, we are going to need these measurements when we go to draft our front culotte pattern. So keep those handy and nearby. So here I have my flared skirt block for my front pattern, and you can see once again all I've done here is traced around my block in order to transfer it to some paper here. Now you might be wondering how I transferred this lovely balance line that I've established here on my flared skirt. All I've done here to transfer it is I've taken an awl, which just has a little bit of a pointy point there, and I've just, before I've actually lifted my pattern block up, I've just kind of made little perforations along the curved line so that I can actually see and transfer that. I've only transferred my low hip. You can definitely do this for the high hip as well. Now that we have our front flared skirt block traced, we can go ahead and begin the drafting process for the front. So in order to begin our draft for our front culotte pattern, what we're going to do is plot the similar points on the front that we had on the back. So the first one that you're going to plot is F to G, and F to G is simply going to be a segment that is equal to D to B on your back draft, and you'll note that we measured that, and the measurement that I got for that was 9.5 inches. So I'm simply going to plot that here. I'm going to label this F here at the hem. Here is going to be G. Now the next segment that I wanted to plot from the back measurement is G to X. And G to X is going to be equal to B to X on the back draft. And you'll remember that I measured that and got 6 3/4 of an inch. So I'm simply going to plot from G up to X 6 3/4 of an inch. So I am just plotting these points in correspondence with the back pattern. Now, G to H is going to be a calculation that you're going to have to make using the basic block front hip width measurement that we took. Now, you'll remember that my front hip width measurement on my draft was 10.5 inches. So what I did was divide that in half, which gave me a 5 1/4. But this time, because we're working with the front culotte pattern, we're going to subtract 3/4 of an inch from that number, or 2 centimeters if you're working in metric. So I've got 5 1/4 is half my front hip width. I'm going to subtract 3/4 of an inch from that. And I'm simply going to mark that on a line that is extending in a perpendicular manner from the center front line. I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom to get my I segment. I'm just going to extend straight out from center front. The same length G to H, F to I is also going to be that 4.5 inches for my particular draft. Now, because you're using personal measurements, of course, you are going to use your own calculations for this. Then you're simply going to join I and H. So you will have just a rectangle that you have added to your flared skirt pattern that is going to be your front crotch extension for the culotte pattern. Now, similar to the back pattern, we are also going to sort of plot in the crotch curve shape for our front pattern. It's a little bit different, but what we're going to do is start out the same and just draw a box that extends out from this G point. And then you're going to draw a line that is 1.5 inches long that intersects those 2 corner points. So it's a 45-degree angle from the G point. You're going to make that line 1.5 inches long. This is going to give us the deepest point of our front crotch curve. Now, once we have that, we can join X to this point and blending into our H there. And again, I'm simply going to take my curve and see if I can find a really nice shape. Now you're going to see here that my French curve sort of leans away at the X point. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about blending into this center front line. So if I need to start lower, I'll do that in order to meet my crotch curve depth area there. Now, just to point out here, I have made the length of my culottes basically knee length, which is what my skirt block was made at. But you can actually make this whatever length you want. You can actually make it as a pant if you would prefer. You can make it knee length, you can make it calf length, you can even make it shorter to have little short shorts. You can also add additional flare if you choose. There are many ways that you can sort of transform how this is going to look on your body. But once you are done this basic culotte draft, what you can do is simply add seam allowances to the front and back. I've added a 1/2 inch here because that's sort of what's been going along with the skirt block tutorial. But I've also added 1¼ inch hem allowance here so that I have a really nice sort of wider hem, which will make it a really nice shape at the bottom. In addition to that, you want to transfer any of your notches to the cut line, of course. So you can see here that I have a marking for my hip line. I also had one here at the side seam for my high hip, which I haven't marked in, but that's completely okay. I've also have a little notch here at center back, and I've also got hem allowance notches here at the inseam and then of course at the outseam. Now you may also want to include a double notch here, possibly at about the X point here. You can simply add notches there, one at the X and one perhaps about a ½ inch below for your back. And then on the front, you can do a very similar thing and just add one notch at the center front at the X point. I hope that you enjoyed this pattern design project. With this easy adaptation to your skirt block, you now have infinite possibilities for easy fitting, simple to sew, versatile garments. Now, if you're ready to level up your drafting and pattern making skills, visit inhousepatternstudio.com for more advanced online courses that will have you drafting and designing patterns like a pro. I'll chat with you soon. Bye for now.